When did the Roman Empire fall? The million-dollar question that captivated historiography for centuries has no definite answer. The conventional answer is 476, the abdication of the Western Roman Emperor Romulus Augustulus Theodoro. More recently, as more people saw the continuity of the Eastern Roman Empire with Imperial Roman tradition, the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453 became more preferred as the end date. And neither would be wrong. If you followed this channel, you'd know here 1453 is used as the end date of the Roman Empire proper, while 1461 is that of the end of Roman imperial tradition, with the surrender of David Megas Komnenos of Trebizond, the last emperor whose legitimacy may be traced back to the Pater Patriae, Augustus himself. However, not every Roman lived in an empire, and some survived longer under simpler states, like the Principality of Theodoro, an offshoot of the Empire of Trebizond, inhabited by Romans and Romanized Goths as citizens, and lasted until 1475, late December of 1475 to be exact, and possibly 550 years precisely before I published these videos. Indeed, a millennium after the traditional date of 476 was the definitive, true end of any Roman political presence in our world, when no more state ruled by Romans existed anymore. And barely anyone knows about this elusive principality, the true last bastion of political Romanitas, which was, paradoxically, also a stronghold for the boogeymen who contributed most of all to the collapse of Western Rome, the Goths. Yes, you heard me right, the Goths. No, not these Goths, but the real Goths who overran the Roman Empire after the Battle of Adrianople, who psychologically scarred Rome for eternity when Alaric sacked the Eternal City, who shaped the historical trajectory for Western Europe, along with other Germanic peoples. So you'd be right to ask, what the bloody hell were Goths doing in the utter northeasternmost corner of the Roman world, the Crimea? And why were they the last Roman citizens that kept Romanitas alive in a state of their own when both the Roman emperors of the East in Constantinople and the Trebizond failed to resist the onslaught of Mehmed II's Ottoman war machine? The Goths, a people associated with the medieval West and being the antithesis of ancient Rome, alive and well in medieval Eastern Rome and upholding Roman traditions, sounds almost like a dumb April Fool's video to troll and waste your time, but I promise it's not. Stick with me for this fascinating story of Gothia, and you'll see why this happened. Rome was divided into West and East. When East Rome fell in 1204 to the Crusaders, I introduced you to the concept of East Rome, Trebizond, the first new imperial center to rise for the exiled Romans. So likewise I must show you the concept of the East Goths, the Crimean Goths. There were Visigoths, Western Goths, who invaded the Roman Empire earlier and settled further west on the corpse of the old empire, in Hispania. Then there were Ostrogoths, the Eastern Goths, who lived further east in the old Gothic homeland and fell under the Hunnic Empire, so they settled on Roman territory fairly late, under their king Theodoric the Amal, who was sent to save Italy from Odoacer by Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno. Both Visigoths and Ostrogoths became Christianized in the late 4th century by their bishop, Ulfilas, so they were all Arians as opposed to the Orthodox Romans, with one exception, the East Goths. Among Ostrogoths, some settled in the Crimean Peninsula by the 3rd century already, and didn't migrate further like fellow Eastern Goths. And since the Huns got in the way between the Crimea and Eastern Europe, contact was effectively cut off between the Crimean Goths and the rest of the Aryan Gothic world down south, wreaking havoc for Rome. With the introduction of Christianity, non-Aryan and fully Orthodox Christianity, most likely directly from Jerusalem and the Palestinian tradition to the Crimea, the Goths who stayed there became fully Orthodox, just like the Romans, some of whom lived in Kherson, close to the region that eventually became known as Gothia, the home of the Crimean Goths, whose capital was a naturally fortified settlement known today as Mangop, but first recorded by Procopius as Dory in the 6th century. One of the many variants of the Gothic stronghold we would call Theodoro was known as. So that's the first important factor of the identity of Crimean Gothia that you should remember. They were fully and deeply Orthodox, like the Romans. Secondly, since the beginning they lived side by side with Crimean Romans and Romanized rather quickly, with or without imperial authority in the region. It was in the Justinianic era of Procopius that the Romans re-established control in the province of Kherson, lost in the migratory chaos of the 5th century, and after that, Kherson and the Crimea played an intriguing role in East Roman history, as a hub for the exiles of mainstream Roman society, which was going through many religious and political tumults in the 7th and 8th centuries, in the last phase of late antiquity, as the Heraclean and Isaurian dynasties struggled to cope with a rapidly changing medieval world. The most threatening figures for the government, from Pope Martinus of Rome under Constans II to his grandson, the mad lad Justinian II Rhinometos, were ostracized to these harsh lands, on the border between the Romans and the wild north, Scythia. And thus thirdly, the Crimeans, Gothia too, were on the fringes of Roman civilization, the antithesis of Constantinople, unwilling to submit to central authority. Sometimes this was a good thing, and the stubborn Crimean Goths and Romans proved to be more pious Orthodox Christians than their southern brethren. During iconoclasm, when the historiography of Constantinople fell to its lowest ebb in all history, we surprisingly get quite a lot of information on the happenings of the Crimea, where its ardent bishops, like Saint Stephanos of Sugdea, another important city on the coast, Christianized his region fully and suffered persecution for resisting the emperor's heresy obstinately. More fascinating than Stephanos was the tale of Saint Ioannis, bishop of Gothia. His family was a military one from northern Asia Minor who migrated to Gothia, which made Ioannis a native of Parthenita. When Constantinos V Copronymos convened the iconoclast Council of Hierea, the old bishop of Gothia signed the document, so he was rejected by his flock and Ioannis replaced him in 755. The young bishop spent 3 years in Jerusalem, as Palestine was another hotbed for Orthodox Roman refugees besides the Crimea. On the way home, Ioannis passed through Georgia, again a bastion of iconophiles just outside of the empire, and was ordained as Bishop of Gothia properly by the Catholicos of Georgia around 759. Then in Gothia, Ioannis had a long tenure full of all sorts of miracles, but when it came time for Empress Irene of Athens to restore orthodoxy in 787, our iconodule Gothic bishop was not in Nicaea. Why? he was caught up north right that moment in the struggle for the autonomy of Gothia against the masters of the northern Crimea, the Khazars. The bishop was imprisoned for a plot, but managed to escape and died 4 years later. This, then, is the fourth characteristic of Crimean Roman Gothic life: the constant threat and coexistence with the great steppe power in the north. First the Khazars, then later the Cumans, Mongols, and Tartars. But to live with powerful Scythian neighbors and sometimes overlords was a staple of life in Gothia for a millennium. Usually they managed to get on amicably, and the emergence of a new common threat to both in the 9th century was what caused the emperors to organize Kherson into a proper thema around the 830s, staffed with strategos and military officials. And that is the fifth and final element of Gothia's culture I wish to highlight: the Russian connection. For the newcomers were the Rus. With both steppe conquerors and Russians, relations were never secure, for the Khazars in the 10th century would lash out on the Christians in southern Crimea when their power was in decline. An extremely rare source, written by a toparch of Gothia around the 960s, shows this. This toparch was under constant harassment from a previously friendly barbarian people, the Khazars, and he took a lengthy journey through the icy hell of the harsh Crimean landscape to ask for the protection of a new great regional ruler, Sviatoslav. For a few years then, Gothia was Sviatoslav's protectorate, before he was crushed by Ioannis Themistokis in 971. The Russians too were threatening at times, seen as when Sviatoslav's successor, Prince Vladimir, invaded Kherson in 988, although afterwards Emperor Vasilios II managed to convert the Rus to Orthodox Christianity. Relations between the Russians and the Roman Crimeans were much more consistently peaceful. So now you know the 5 key elements of Crimean Roman Gothic civilization. One in constant danger, but they managed to thrive anyway, because, in Walter White's words, they were the danger. The most daring and obstinate lot of Roman society. No wonder they'd be the last Roman polity to fall. And now that I have exposed their history up to the year 1000, under the Bulgar Slayer, as usual, here they had their peak prosperity in the 11th century, and besides a Khazar raid in 1016, nothing really went wrong. But that was the last desperate Khazar attempt at prominence, and they were soon replaced by the Cumans as the main North Crimean power. And in the later 11th and 12th centuries, the happenings of Roman Crimea were the most obscure for us, and it is in this mystery that the Principality slowly formed. So let's begin our narrative in the Komnenian period in the next installment of the history of the last Goths and Romans stuck in the Crimea. Yes, this is another classic instance of me trying to push some background info on a fascinating historical subject and accidentally spending too much time on it. So I feel, as I've been consistently publishing videos too long for the attention span of any normal human being this year, I'll make 2 short videos for once, before 2025 is over. Hopefully this is the start of me going back to my channel roots of simpler videos next year besides my big video essay projects, but also because, as for the fall of Theodoro in December of 1475, no historian has yet even proposed a narrowed-down date. But I think I might be onto something here, and the first possible of this date range that I've deduced is December 28th. So to commemorate the 550-year anniversary of the end of the final truly Roman state, the 2 videos on Gothia will be published on the first and last days of this most likely few days, respectively Julian and Gregorian dates, so that at least one of the days in the interval that I'm posting will fall on when Theodoro fell. I will elaborate on my full reasoning next video, coming in 3 days, and I invite everyone to examine my reasoning and critique it, because dates are my biggest headache, and I can't believe I'm even trying something that even the most eminent of historians in this field, like Alexander Vasiliev, my prime source, has avoided doing. I hope when I show you the logic of my attempt next video, I won't embarrass myself too much, but I also hope that you will watch it nonetheless and enjoy it. We pick up next time in the 12th century, and now I thank my patrons: Dragon Lord, Rothea Game Projects, Cody Danroth, Tiropita Productions, Francis Morin, Patrick Gampo, Kiasik, and Alexandros Sideris. Thank you all, everyone.